There you go. All right. Greetings, everyone. I'm Amy Antonucci. I'm a New Hampshire Peace Action Board member, and I'm glad to be here to welcome you to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online for March 27th, 2023. Quick reminder on Zoom, we love it when you keep your video on, although we don't expect it, but we do ask that you keep your audio muted and use the chat for questions for now. We almost always get to a point where people can raise their hands, but just for now, let's stick with the chat. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all, based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict. In that spirit of respect, we'd like to take a moment and acknowledge that we are doing our work on Yidakina, the traditional ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. We honor with gratitude the land and waterways and those people who have stewarded this area throughout the generations. Thanks to Indigenous New Hampshire for that graphic. So we started this online conversation series to help us stay connected during the pandemic, and have found it just a great way to engage with each other in New Hampshire and beyond. And tonight, we're really pleased to welcome back Peace Action National's president, Kevin Martin. Kevin joined the staff of National Peace Action on September 4th, 2001. Can you imagine that start to your time with them? He previously worked for Project Abolition and Illinois Peace Action. He writes and he travels abroad extensively representing the group. Tonight he's going to update us on ongoing campaigns, particularly concerning the Yemen War. And we will absolutely get to Q&A. And I'm sure at that point he can speak to other issues that you have on your mind. But for now, again, let's keep chat for the questions and join me in welcoming Kevin.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I am joining you from Piscataway occupied land. And especially when you're talking about the DC area, the levels of occupation are quite interesting to think about. It's great to see so many familiar faces, even some folks not from New Hampshire. And I just wanted to take a minute because in the past, I have done a fair bit of work with New Hampshire Peace Action, as with a lot of affiliates. One of the proudest things that I ever did was I was on the hiring committee that hired Will Hopkins back in 2009. And I can't say that I had any great wisdom in hiring Will, but I think it worked out spectacularly for the organization. And Doreen has been with the organization since 2010. And for any nonprofit to have employees that are that loyal and diligent and long tenured is just fabulous. And I also remembered Amy from quite a while ago. And she said she's been active since the late 90s. So again, that kind of stability in leadership in any nonprofit, not just peace groups, is something to be commended, and certainly a boon and an asset to New Hampshire Peace Action. So I wanted to start with what I think is mostly good news about our work on Yemen, which is something that Peace Action has been working hard on for a number of years, and I know most of you know that. So on Saturday, which was the 8th anniversary of the beginning of the Saudi Arabia-led coalition bombing in Yemen, we had a terrific online rally, an international online rally. And Peace Action was asked to host that along with our friends from Action Corps, Friends Committee on National Legislation, the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, and about 30 organizations that came together. And we had Senator Elizabeth Warren, we had Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party in Britain, a good friend and hero of mine. We had Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ro Khanna. There might have been one or two other members of Congress, as well as Yemeni activists. And it was just a great event, about an hour and a half, a little less. If you didn't get to see that, we have sent around the link on Facebook, and it's also going to be on YouTube. And if need be later, I could dig that out and put it in the chat. But I highly recommend it if you have a chance, because it was very informative in terms of what's going on with Yemen, but also just, I think, very inspirational in terms of all the speakers that we had. So one of the things I think is very important for us to recognize is, even if we seem frustrated or dissatisfied about the political progress we're making, that our actions do have an impact in the world, and in the case of Yemen, have helped to save lives. Now, the conflict in Yemen is horrific. Nearly 400,000 people have died. And of course, US complicity, our weapons sales to the Saudi-led coalition, General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and all those, thieves, those masters of death, masters of war, are contributing weapons that are killing civilians, and that's unacceptable to us. And we've been working diligently for years now, but we have had an impact. There were 2 ceasefires, and even after the ceasefire was expired, the Saudi Air Force has not bombed in Yemen for 10 months now. So we haven't achieved the peace that we want, and there will be much left to do to rebuild the economy and the society for the Yemeni people. And we have to stay focused on ending the suffering of the people of Yemen. But even though it's been frustrating, we haven't gotten as far as we would have liked with Congress or the administration, we do have to acknowledge that we have put pressure on the Saudi-led coalition, and that absolutely, even the military restrictions that we have been able to put, absolutely have saved Yemeni lives. Of course, in 2019, we were able to get a war powers resolution passed through both houses of Congress, which is very rare. It was then vetoed by then President Trump, and we didn't have the votes to override that veto, unfortunately. So last year, at the end of the year, you may remember Bernie Sanders introduced, or he was about to introduce, a war powers resolution. And this was at the end of the year. It was in December, and we sort of scrambled to work on that and lobby for it. And then he decided to pull it back. And part of the problem was the issue had been stuck for about 2 years, and we didn't know where a lot of senators stood on the issue. So I think Sanders did a good thing in terms of getting the issue unstuck a little bit, but he wasn't sure he had the votes, and that some key Democratic senators said they weren't going to vote for it. And the administration, the Biden administration, was opposed to it and circulated talking points. So Bernie decided to pull it back, and some people were frustrated by that. I actually think it was probably a smart decision at the time. If he had put it forward and we had lost the vote, that could have been perceived as a setback. So the process since then has been, we are working with Senator Sanders and also some key House leaders to reintroduce a war powers resolution, but we haven't gotten there yet. And Senator Sanders is negotiating with the White House for maybe some sort of a compromise. My guess is that won't prove fruitful, and we will want to go ahead, hopefully in the next month, with a war powers resolution. But in the meantime, another important tool has come forward, and this was about a week and a half ago. Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut and Senator Mike Lee from Utah, so it's bipartisan. Lee's a Republican, Murphy's a Democrat. And Lee in the past had been a leader with Sanders on the war powers resolution, introduced a privileged resolution under Section 502B of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961. And when I saw this come out, it jogged a little civics portion of my brain and a little part of my brain that tries to remember congressional procedures, parliamentary procedures, and all that. But I was very foggy about it. So I had to look it up, and we have some good allies who have put together some fact sheets on it. The basics of it is that the Foreign Assistance Act, going back to before I was born, very clearly states that the United States can't give weapons or military assistance to countries that have systemic gross human rights violations. That certainly applies to Saudi Arabia and lots of other countries that we have gone ahead and sold weapons or given military assistance to in the past and currently. So what this does, the good thing about it, it's a privileged resolution. It can be brought forward to the floor on relatively short notice. You don't have to wait for the Senate leadership to approve it. And it looks like it will probably come forward in mid-April, so just in 2 or 3 weeks. And what it does is it instructs the Secretary of State within 30 days to prepare a report on Saudi human rights. Now, there's no way you can expect that Anthony Blinken is excited about this, the Secretary of State, but there's no way that he's going to be able to put some kind of a sheen or a gloss over Saudi Arabia's terrible human rights record. So if within 30 days he does not produce that, Congress can pass the resolution and that would stop any US military assistance to Saudi Arabia. I suspect that probably won't be the way it plays out. I think Blinken will sheepishly submit the report, and then we'll see where it goes from there. He transmits the report to the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, and then they decide what to do with it and do they bring it to a vote, et cetera. So what, again, this is a tool like the War Powers Resolution that gives us leverage to stop US military support for the Saudi-led coalition. And we need to do this for all kinds of other reasons, not just Yemen. And there's just no reason at all the United States should be selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. And of course, Saudi Arabia has become our #1 arms purchaser over the last 5-10 years or so. And that was true under the Obama administration. It was even ratcheted up even more under the Trump administration, but it's continued under the Biden administration. So we are hopefully later this week going to have an action alert on this 502B. And you don't have to necessarily remember that. You could Google it if you wanted to. But the point is that it's Congress putting pressure on the administration to stop US military assistance to Saudi Arabia because of its gross pattern of human rights violations. So we're thinking that we'll be mobilizing around that in the next week or two. And we're looking at lobby days between the various organizations that help put on the online rally that we did on Saturday, again, probably in middle of April. And by that time, we may know if there is also a War Powers Resolution. So we could have 2 very powerful congressional tools or levers that we can pull on. And I'm thinking that your Senator Shaheen is going to be somebody fairly important for us to focus on. Actually, I think both of your senators will be important to focus on. So the other thing is just looking at not only what we can do here politically in the United States, but favorable conditions in the region. So this had been rumored or in the works since at least last summer, I think. But the recent announcement of a normalization of relations and resuming diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran is very hopeful. And not just for Yemen, but for a lot of other reasons in terms of conflict or potential conflict in the region. And this ongoing competition for supremacy in the region, sometimes oversimplified as Sunni versus Shia, is extremely expensive and unsustainable. And even as bad as the government of Saudi Arabia is, they've come to understand that they can't continue this. So it makes a lot of sense. And to its credit, China played a role in brokering this agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, there have been some various reports that I've read that are very interesting, that doesn't guarantee there will be peace in Yemen, and there are various factions in Yemen that need to be part of an eventual peace agreement, including civil society and including women's organizations. There is solid data across all kinds of countries across decades that whenever women, and particularly women's organizations, are part of peace negotiations, diplomacy, it's much more successful. And this is indisputable. You can look up studies on this. So and again, it's not just the cessation of hostilities. Also, it was significant that Iran which in the past has been cagey or denied that it actually supplied weapons to the Houthis, say that they will stop providing weapons to the Houthis. So all of that is very positive. So we can play a role being in solidarity with the forces in Yemen that want peace. And you have to understand that even though there hasn't been any bombing for 10 months, Yemen is still under a blockade. Only about 40% of the fuel needs of the country are getting in. The main port of Hodeidah, they've only had one container ship deliver any goods. No medicines are getting in. Food aid gets in, but also just humanitarian aid is not sufficient for a country at war. We need to end the war and then rebuild the economy. You can't just have an economy. This is certainly true with Afghanistan as well. You can't have an economy that is just based on humanitarian assistance. You have to be able to rebuild the economy for the people there. So all those things I think are positive, but it would be premature to say that peace is inevitable. So we have to, of course, continue our efforts. And again, we will have more information coming soon about lobby days, about this 502B resolution, and about a potential war powers resolution for Yemen. But I think we should all feel positive about the momentum that we have helped create with our work over years, even though it's been far too slow. And of course, the slogan that we use is Yemen can't wait. And it's one of the challenges of our work that we understand there's this horrific tragedy unfolding and the United States is aiding and abetting, and to impart urgency when most of the rest of the world isn't really paying much attention. I mean, that's true of so many of our issues. But I encourage you to think positively that we are moving in the right direction because of momentum that we have helped to create. I want to talk about just a few other issues. One is a quick teaser, and I'm sorry I can't give you more information, but it could be as soon as tomorrow, a significant congressional initiative on Israel and Palestine, and particularly targeting US military aid to Israel based on obviously all the things that we've known for a long time about why that's problematic. I can't say more than that. I'm teasing you deliberately to sort of pique your interest and make sure you're paying attention. It could be as soon as tomorrow that this congressional initiative is announced. I don't know a lot of the details myself, and I think a lot of us might not be satisfied and might say it's insufficient. But Congress just has been so crickets, unfortunately, for the most part, about U.S. military aid to Israel and the ongoing oppression of the Palestinians. Bernie Sanders did make some noise in saying that he was going to be raising this issue. The thing that I know of that's coming tomorrow is not from Sanders, it's from the House of Representatives, and it's from an important ally of ours in the House. So stay tuned, watch the news for this tomorrow, and we'll be sharing information about that as well. Is Jeremy Love here tonight? I didn't know, I didn't see. I'm gonna steal a little of his thunder, but you guys probably know this. Of course, he's been doing such good work for quite some time on the Back from the Brink campaign and the resolution HRES 77 with Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, his sponsorship. That's really one of the best pieces of legislation on nuclear disarmament that we've had in a long time. Of course, the SANE Act, which was named for our organization's original name, the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, that Ed Markey had introduced, and there's been some other good legislation on no first use of nuclear weapons, on ending the president's sole authority, et cetera. But the good thing about the HRES 77 is that's pretty much all wrapped up in that bill, including in the name of the bill and in the substance, in the text of it, supporting the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So that'll be another issue that we are going to be lobbying on. And that'll be coming up, well, it's ongoing, and we're already encouraging members of Congress in the House especially to support that. There's a couple of unusual opportunities on nuclear disarmament issues that I just want to talk about very briefly. The G7 summit meeting in Japan, it's actually in Hiroshima this year. And Prime Minister Kishida from Japan is originally from Hiroshima. And because it's Japan's turn to host the G7 summit, he got to choose for it to be in Hiroshima. And, on the one hand, it's good because he is doing that specifically to raise the issue of nuclear disarmament and to raise up the voices of the Habakasha. Now, the thing is, a lot of our peace colleagues in Japan are, what's the right word, of two minds about this, because on the one hand, it is an opportunity. On the other hand, they see that this is pretty cynical by Prime Minister Kishida, because he has been increasing the Japanese military budget, increasing military ties and exercises between the United States and South Korea and others in the region, the AUKUS new formation as well, making some menacing noises towards North Korea, and possibly threatening Article 9, the so-called peace constitution in Japan. So I fully share their skepticism about this and thinking that this is a cynical move by Prime Minister Kishida, but it does contain the opportunity for us to raise the issue of nuclear disarmament. And for the first time, I didn't even know about this. So with these G7 summits, there's always been what's called the C7 as well, which is civil society parallel meetings and parallel track. And this year, for the first time, the C7 civil society track includes a nuclear disarmament working group. So I've been part of some meetings and drafting a very good civil society statement on nuclear disarmament. And there have been some colleagues, and we have to figure out exactly what this will be. And we have a little bit of time. It's in mid-May to put pressure on Biden to say, look, you can't just go to Hiroshima and tour the museum and say a few nice flowery words. You should take this opportunity to announce some real changes in US nuclear policy, like no first use of nuclear weapons, for example. I can share this later. What I should probably do is put together a few things to share later. A video from Mayor Tad Akiba, the former mayor of Hiroshima, who I consider a friend and colleague, who did a very good video about this and about the C7. So that's coming up in May, and we'll have information about what we can do in terms of solidarity with our Japanese colleagues who will be organizing in Hiroshima. In July, there's going to be a fairly big, that I can tell, film about Robert Oppenheimer. And it's going to be introduced at a sort of opportune time. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but right around the anniversary of the Trinity test and before August 6th and 9th, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they're being sort of tight-lipped about the film and what the politics are going to be. Cillian Murphy, who is one of my favorite actors, a fabulous Irish actor, is playing Oppenheimer. And just knowing him and his politics, I don't think he would have agreed to do this movie if it was just going to be some heroic elegy to Oppenheimer. I really doubt that's what it's going to be. And I believe the director is Christopher Nolan, and that also would sort of not be in his ilk to do it that way either. But we'll have more information about this in terms of how we can maybe make media and social media hay out of this Oppenheimer film. Then the last thing is looking ahead to the end of the year. Some of you may know or may have even participated, I know some of you have, in some of the international conferences around the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or human rights treaties, or obviously the climate change treaties, or the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference. So the second conference of the state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons will be at the United Nations in New York City in late November and early December. And we're part of a working group that is meeting to figure out what we should be doing, both inside the UN and outside the UN, in terms of our own meetings and conferences, et cetera. So that is a rundown of some of the significant opportunities. And I'm excited about all of those because there's been a lot of disappointment in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, really not taking advantage of opportunities to move forward on nuclear disarmament. Things are not great now between the United States and Russia, obviously, because of Ukraine, but also other problems in that relationship. And I think the United States has caused a lot of those problems. We can talk about that in a little bit. The New START treaty, which is the only existing treaty right now on nuclear weapons between the US and Russia, will expire in 2026 if it's not renewed and hopefully extended, and hopefully a new treaty to go even farther with nuclear weapons reductions. Right now, the status is that Russia suspended their cooperation in the inspections for New START. They haven't said that they're pulling out of the treaty. Sometimes people mistakenly say, oh, they've pulled out of the treaty. That not yet. All they've done is suspend the cooperation with those inspections. Hopefully that will be reversed soon. The inspections can resume and we can get back to, and the thing is, Biden has said this, and even the Russian government has said this as well, that regardless of sour relations around Ukraine or anything else, that there's still an interest in the United States and Russia to lower the nuclear threat and to negotiate further nuclear weapons reductions. And after all, we did that the whole time during the Cold War, when there was horrible cooperation and proxy wars and competition between the US and the Soviet Union around the world. We still had arms reduction treaties. Last thing I want to say about that is, just over the weekend, I had missed this, and I appreciate one of our members in Kansas City who reached out to me this morning, that this had been talked about, that Putin has announced that Russia is going to put short-range tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. I don't think this is a good thing, but it doesn't fundamentally alter the already dangerous situation in terms of nuclear weapons in Europe. There's Russia's nuclear weapons, obviously. There are nuclear weapons from the US that can hit any target anywhere on the planet. There's US and UK nuclear weapons, or excuse me, UK and French nuclear weapons. And then people forget that the United States has between 100 and 200 warheads in 5 European NATO countries: Turkey, Netherlands, Italy, Belgium, and Germany. So that is a long-standing problem, obviously, for Russia and for others in the region. They're on planes, they're not on missiles. And of course, a lot of our European peace colleagues in those countries would like to get those US NATO sharing of nuclear weapons out of their countries. In Britain, they're also the British arsenal. They're very unhappy there because they are talking about getting a new warhead from the United States. So I don't want, I want nuclear weapons done by 7 o'clock tonight or 8 o'clock tonight, right? We all do. And what Russia's doing is, can be seen as a provocation in terms of stationing tactical weapons in Belarus. But again, to emphasize, it is not a fundamental change in the already unacceptably dangerous situation of nuclear weapons in Europe, which again, the US, UK, and French arsenals are a huge part of the problem. So I wanted to wrap up with just one other issue, but we can certainly talk about other issues, Pentagon budget, or other issues that you might be interested in. In terms of the war in Ukraine, there's been a fair amount of, I would say, discord. I don't want to overstate it as a rift or a split or anything like that. I would say discord within the peace, anti-war, disarmament movement around Ukraine and what to do about Ukraine. And I think that's understandable. I think there is a frustration that we have not made more progress over the decades on dismantling the war machine, and particularly the US war machine, US militarism and US imperialism. And I had the pleasure of going to Russia in 1997 representing Peace Action, and I loved it. I loved the Russian people, the language, the food, the art, the architecture. I got to see the ballet at the Bolshoi. It was one of the highlights of my life. And I loved the people. And at the time in 97, there was a bit of a flowering of nonprofits, not unlike Peace Action and other peace groups and environmental groups in Russia, that we got to meet. And some we got to stay in touch with over a while. Now, without getting into a lot of the dynamics, including that a lot of people forget that the United States actually invaded Russia, or was it in the process of becoming the Soviet Union way back in 1912, or no, a little bit after that. People forget about that. And then all the mistakes in terms of NATO expansion eastward. NATO should have been abolished. And we're part of something called the No to NATO network. So there have been all kinds of US mistakes. And to me, there was all kinds of meddling in the Russian economy. Jeffrey Sachs, who's now repented for this, and the Harvard boys who helped to privatize the Russian economy, which stole the natural resources of the country from the people of Russia. That was horrible. Bill Clinton illegally helped Yeltsin get reelected. If that had happened in this country, people would have been up in arms. And of course, people were up in arms about Russian supposed intervention in our election. So there was all kinds of problems in terms of US meddling. And it was a mixed bag when I was there in '97, because there was an opening, flowering of democracy and of NGOs, et cetera. But then you did have a heavy thumbprint of the United States meddling in the economy of Russia. Well, a lot of that, has gone by the wayside. And to me, the most general thing I would say about it is a historical blunder that the United States and NATO and the West treated Russia as some loser that just had to eat our dust at the end of the Cold War. We could have talked about it, and we do still have many common interests with Russia on reducing nuclear weapons, on addressing violent extremism, on environmental, on climate change, on developing new technology, on addressing pandemics, et cetera. The list to me of things that we have common interest with Russia is a long one, and we need to get back to all of that. And US imperialism is the worst. None of that excuses what Putin and Russia has done in invading Ukraine. And one of the big rifts or splits that I see is people that want to, and it partly out of their frustration over not being able to dismantle US imperialism, is somehow say that US imperialism is the root of all evil and excuses Russia, et cetera. Well, that infantilizes Russia, as if Russia doesn't have its own interests, malign, benign, neutral, whatever. So I think Putin himself would laugh at that people that try to excuse what Putin has done, and I'm not defending Putin at all, that everything is about U.S. imperialism. And I think if you want to, and I'm not getting into the fascists that the United States supported in 2014 and overthrowing the government and all that stuff. There's no excuse for any of US meddling and supporting those kinds of forces. But again, there's no excuse for what Russia has done. So I think one of the things that Peace Action has tried to do, and then on the other hand, there's most of us who are what I would call practical pacifists. Maybe not theological pacifists. I actually come from Mennonite and Quaker and Church of the Brethren heritage, although I wasn't raised in any of those churches. And I'm for banning everything above super soakers. I think, weapons are just horrific. But for a lot of people that the United States and NATO is providing weapons to Ukraine, it just goes against our nature. On the other hand, the people of Ukraine are the victim of an illegal, immoral, horrible attack. And they are going to want to defend themselves. And where are they going to get weapons from? They're going to get them mostly from the United States and from NATO. And if we take a hard position and say no US weapons or no NATO weapons, that is coercive to the people of Ukraine. That basically says, okay, you're not going to get weapons from us. That means you're going to have to accept Russian capture of a good part of your territory. Now, I have no particular love for any nation state, but if the people of Ukraine think that that is unacceptable or think there has to be some kind of negotiation or diplomacy over the Donbass or Crimea or whatever, that's going to happen at some point. But it poses a quandary for a lot of peace groups in terms of what should we be saying. Peace Action is never going to be pro-arms sales. We're never going to be out there saying, yes, we support this weapon sale or anything like that. But it does pose a quandary in terms of what do people who are under illegal attack do to defend themselves. So Peace Action has maybe had less discord on these types of dynamics around Ukraine. The other thing is, unfortunately, we have almost no leverage over the actions of Putin and of Russia. Because there's a lot of these tensions and dynamics, we've put together a pretty comprehensive messaging guide on Ukraine, which I'm hoping we're going to be distributing this week. And I'd love to get people's responses to it, reactions to it after we circulate that. And the best we can do is try to press everybody we can in the US government for diplomacy, because I think there are well-founded fears that the US, and especially the weapons contractors, wouldn't mind if this awful conflict continues for years to bleed Russia dry and to weaken Russia. Well, that's a terrible thing to do to the people of Ukraine and also to the people of Russia. The ordinary people of Russia are the victims of this as well in terms of this horrible war. And of course, the heroic anti-war activists in Russia, most of whom, of course, have been harassed, if not put in jail, need our solidarity as well. So I maybe said a lot of controversial things on Ukraine that some of you may want to challenge or say, Martin, you're full of it. I'm glad to have you come at me if you like, but I'm also glad to address any questions of what I was talking about on Yemen, on nuclear disarmament issues, on Pentagon budget, on any of the issues that Peace Action works on.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And folks, now it's time for your questions, and we will do some comments, but we do like to lean towards as many questions as possible while we have Kevin here to answer them. The chat is fine to put them in. Also, Will is demonstrating hand raising, and he will be called upon first. But you can use either of those to get our attention. And we just ask you to, be system. We want to get to as many people as possible. And I have a feeling there's going to be a lot that people want to talk about. So Will, get us started.
So I wanted to branch into one little area you didn't talk about. It is a legislative area. The repeal of the Iraq authorization for the use of military force. 2 amendments were heard, and it's passed out of Senate Foreign Relations with an ought to pass at this point. Does that look to you like it's likely to make it? And what can we do to help it along?
So I was following that last week, and there were a bunch of amendments, but most of them were voted down. And some of them I thought were helpful and some of others not so helpful. I have not had a chance to check today. I thought they were going to try to vote on final passage of that today, but I haven't heard that they did. We think that's long overdue. The reporting on that has not been as good as it should have been, because it's actually the bill by Senator Shaheen from Virginia is to repeal both the 1991 and 2002 authorizations for the use of military force on Iraq, not the post 9/11 2001 regarding Afghanistan. And for us, I think this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. It's not just a break against future U.S. adventurism. It's a correction long overdue in terms of Congressional War Powers Authority. The Constitution is very clear that only Congress can declare war and has that authority over matters of war and peace. But Congress has abdicated so often and passed these things that could then become open-ended for presidents, including Obama. They couldn't, even with a straight face, use the AUMFs to justify what they wanted to do in terms of going into Syria. So it's an important thing to do in terms of Constitutional War Powers Authority. And I didn't see that it passed today. So it could be any day now. I think it probably will pass, and the Biden administration supports it.
Great. Thanks, Kevin and Will. Mike, you are next.
Okay, before I ask my question, there's someone in the chat that asked if Kevin's going to visit New Hampshire soon or this summer, I think. And then I'll go ahead and ask my question.
Yeah, yes, in July at World Fellowship Center, we're having a retreat.
So my question, I've been listening to different Russian YouTubers. So Russians speaking to Russians in Russian with English subtitles, and also Russians who speak in English, who have left Russia for their safety. They feel that if they say anything that is anti the political party that's in power, United Russia, that they will be persecuted, somehow jailed or fined or this, that, or the other. And what I keep hearing Russians say to other Russians for the benefit of Russians is that this is a lot worse than we realize, that the state of Russia for the average Russian people, if they're not pro-Putin, which would be, I guess, in America, like anyone who was anti-Trump, right? So it would be you what do you call, face fines or whatever, just for saying anything, for protesting or for. So my question is, how easy will it be to make peace with Russia as long as they're pursuing this policy of going after their own people for either trying to avoid killing people in their neighboring countries or for speaking out?
Well, I think that's an unknowable question. I think that there is a tragedy here for Russia as well as for Ukraine, although I think we have to be focused on Ukraine. So one of the things that not a lot of people have thought about is, well, why doesn't somebody just depose Putin or, take him out and murder him? I don't know that we would want that, because whoever comes after Putin might be worse. There could be worse militarists that might replace him. I again wouldn't try to speculate on what a post-Putin or a post-war Russia would look like. But one of the things that I don't think has gotten enough attention is, as just as it would be for there to be a war crimes tribunal or to bring Putin to justice or others as well. And of course, neither Ukraine nor Russia nor the United States, for that matter, are parties to the International Criminal Court. I think there will be tough questions about Russian reparations to Ukraine, and that will be a burden on the Russian taxpayers. And that has to be thought about in whatever peace diplomacy, whatever deal ends this horror. And you could have something that is extremely punitive against Russia that could lead to a situation as in Germany post World War I. I think these are extremely hard questions, and there's no easy answer, Mike.
Thanks, Kevin. So Moji is next, but Will, can you start looking in the chat? I'm going to ask you to bring in some of those questions after Moji. Go ahead, Moji.
Hi, Kevin, and hi, Will, and hi, Amy. And we're working together very closely with a project I have recently started called Iranian Nonviolence Initiative. And Kevin, I would love to have you as a special guest of Iranian Nonviolence Initiative. One of its goals is to build a reliable channel of communication between Iranian people inside Iran and American peace-loving people. So here is my formal quote-unquote invitation. My question about Ukraine goes back to, and I'm sure you know Dr. Mossadegh of Iran and the democracy, secular democracy that was killed by the MI6 and the CIA on behalf of the lovely oil company that we now know as BP. And Dr. Mossadegh said after the coup that internal despotism and external colonialism are two sides of the same coin. In years past, I have written about and talked about that this relationship, this codependent relationship between internal despotism and external colonialism is even more dangerous and more horrible when the two sides need one another as enemy. So Putin gave the best gift to NATO expansion, the military-industrial complex, and in turn received the greatest gift for his horrible despotism inside Russia. This interdependence is something that a lot of American peace activists, because they are so mad at the military-industrial complex, they go to the side of the Putin. And as an Iranian American, persecuted Iranian American, I live in Boulder, Colorado. I understand how horrible internal despotism is, whether it is in Iran or it is in Russia or other places. But there is an interconnection, interdependence, codependence as so-called enemy between internal despotism and external colonialism. Comment, please. Thank you.
I very much agree. And that's why some of the dynamics that we've been talking about, which I don't hear talked about enough, are needing to be addressed, because the Russian people are also going to be, or are, victims of this as well, in terms of internal repression. And then, of course, the internal repression is justified. And you even look at the language that Putin has sometimes used to justify his policies, and it's like from Despot 101. It's the same thing that they say in every single country, every single time. Again, our main empathy, our main solidarity, and our main focus has to be on the suffering of the people of Ukraine. But the people of Russia are going to pay a heavy, heavy price for this horrible war. Thank you, Moji. And I would love to be part of your Iranian nonviolence dialogue. I would love it. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. By the way, any action, in my opinion, as a peace activist, I believe that the sooner the fire of this war are extinguished, even though Putin, the internal despot, may, in a face-saving way, he may save his dirty face, but the people of Ukraine and the country of Ukraine are being killed, if you will, as well as the people inside Russia. And while in the civilized West, our military budget is nearing $1 trillion. So we really need to understand the interdependence between internal despotism and external colonialism, needing one another as enemy.
Great. Thank you, Moji.
And thank you for accepting our invitation. We'll be in touch with you.
I'll be sure to connect you too.
Thank you.
Will, what have we got in the chat?
So the first question in the chat's from Leo Sandy. Hey, Leo, good to have you here. Leo asks, what is happening with Gitmo and the School of the Americas / WinSec?
I don't know, because Peace Action doesn't follow that issue closely. There are certainly other organizations that do, so I don't want to make something up. I would refer you to other organizations that focus on that issue.
All right, well, maybe we'll have a speaker on that, Leo. But what we do, there are more questions here. So let me, I'll jump right to Bill Woodward's question. Bill says, I invite Kevin's thoughts on Israel-Palestine. Is the Washington consensus listening to the growing number of voices for justice in Palestine? Is AIPAC losing ground to J Street and Jewish Voice for Peace?
I wouldn't say the Washington consensus is changing. I would say that there are members of Congress who are finding that while it is difficult, they can reject AIPAC and take a more independent and more realistic look at U.S. support for Israel, particularly with the protests that are going on right now in Israel. The threat of fascism with the government of Netanyahu and how conservative that is, and the threat to the judiciary, etc. So on the other hand, AIPAC is no joke. And, for a long time, they weren't actually a PAC, but they are now, or they have PACs that are connected, that have gone after and successfully taken out progressives in Democratic primaries, particularly some African-American. And we've seen some of this in some of the races that we've actually endorsed in, and we're kind of surprised. Nina Turner in Cleveland, AIPAC absolutely mobilized and spent a lot of money to defeat her because she might dare be a voice in Congress to be more balanced in favor of Palestinian human rights. So I think it is shifting, as my friend Phyllis Bennis likes to talk about. There's a change in public opinion and discourse, but it's nowhere near reflected in Washington. You still have too many voices in Washington that are just towing the AIPAC line. But as I said, hopefully tomorrow, and I can't say a whole lot about it because I don't know a whole lot about it, but it could be as soon as tomorrow, an important new initiative challenging U.S. military support for Israel, if not tomorrow, very soon in the House of Representatives. So stay tuned for that.
Great, thanks. I think that's it in the chat for at the moment, right, Will?
That is it in the chat for now.
Okay, so folks, you can put some more in. We still have a few minutes. I have a question, actually. I was wondering if peace action, one thing we've been talking a lot about these days is intersectionality, connecting the issue of peace and war and in the US, the military budget, to all these other issues that people care about but don't seem to see the connection. Things like climate, things like poverty, so much. As I think Moji was just saying, the $1 trillion budget we have that sucks all of our resources into that. And I think especially the environmental and climate impact. Is peace action, is there a movement towards trying to make more of those connections and help people, see, and what can we do to be part of that?
I would say yes. And there are a few sectors, and of course, this is sometimes different at the grassroots level than at the national level. If you look at just Saturday's online rally for Yemen, and I posted the video, the link for the video there, we had faith communities, we had obviously people of color, Yemeni Americans, we had Liz Theo Harris, who's the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. A few years ago, Peace Action had our national meeting in Washington right before the People's Climate March. And we did that intentionally to help be there as part of a peace contingent in the People's Climate March. Now, does that make a dent in overall climate change, that all kinds of groups now that are working on climate change think, oh yeah, we have to make a connection with peace and the Pentagon and all that? Unfortunately, no. But that was our, intentionally saying we're going to have our people coming to Washington to do their normal peace action work, but also be part of the People's Climate March. We also, before COVID, had planned a similar thing, that our meeting was going to be in Washington right before the Poor People's Campaign March. And then, of course, during COVID, that was converted to an online thing. So we do things in terms of how we sign on to letters, and, we're making connections analytically, et cetera. But I think when you actually stand with people physically and bring your issues, your constituency like that, I think that's much more powerful and means a lot more. And I'm always for doing that whenever we can.
Great, thanks. We have time for one more question. George has I think her hand up. I'm not sure. Yes.
Thanks, Amy. I will try to say what I say in 2 minutes, so someone else can ask a question, because mine is more of a comment on the last person who spoke and the intersectionalities. There's a way, and this isn't a commercial for the Poor People's Campaign, although I'm on the national CC and the North Carolina CC, but there is a way to talk to about all of the evils, the intersecting evils connected to war and militarism, which is one of them. The evils are poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation, war and militarism, and the distorted moral narrative of some kind of Christian something. Sorry, I don't have that one right. I don't pay attention to it too much. But UFPJ a couple of years ago created talking points that connected all of those pieces, because not everybody sees the connection, even though they're there. The root cause of many of our ills is a culture of violence and the war mentality. So I'll put my email in the chat and folks can take a look at that. Even though it is old, it needs to be updated. But starting in 2020 in North Carolina and many places connected to the Poor People's Campaign, they started doing April 4th participatory readings of Martin Luther King's Beyond Vietnam. And that's a way of getting our work of, peace and justice work into the practice of people who are working on some of the other things. That's what's up.
Thank you so much, George, for that information. I'll also say that the Iranian nonviolence event this past Sunday featured someone speaking about the Poor People's Campaign. So yes, very powerful, very great way to make some connections. And maybe Moji will we'll share some way that people can watch that later if possible. I need to,
Absolutely, absolutely. And
great.
let me say one thing about the Iranian Nonviolence Initiative is a birth child, if you will, of the intersectional circles, formerly called the Circles of Nonviolence and Community Collaboratives, which I initiated in 2013. And it has been endorsed by Erica Chenoweth and Noam Chomsky and Cornel West, among others. So the infrastructure for intersectional collaboration across cause is what seems to be missing, that infrastructure. So if Kevin would pay systemic attention to this issue, I would love it.
Thanks, Moji. We'll keep everyone connected. Let me finish up. I have some things I'd love to tell you. First of all, stay in touch with us at New Hampshire Peace Action at nhpeaceaction.org. You can look us up on Facebook as well to learn more about what we're working on and what programming we have coming up. And I want to just give you a heads up for a few things. One is that this coming Sunday, April 2nd, beginning at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom and Clubhouse, Will Hopkins and I will return to the Iranian Nonviolence Program and would love to have you join the discussion. You'll find info about that in our calendar really soon, I hope. Next, in our conversation series, we have Olivia Zink, the Executive Director of Open Democracy, who's going to talk with us about money in politics and the military-industrial complex. That's April 10th from 7 to 8 p.m. on Zoom. And then I hope a lot of you will join us on Tuesday, April 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Zoom. We're going to have a discussion of The Answers Are There. This is a new book subtitled Building Peace from the Inside Out. The author, Libby Hoffman, will join us. In her book, she talks about what is possible when outside aid animates local leadership and recognizes and honors community wisdom, priorities, and resources, as she witnessed working in Sierra Leone after their culture of community was nearly destroyed by civil war. So this conversation about rebuilding and putting in place more robust ways to connect with each other. We love it. We'd love it if you read the book ahead of time, but even if you can't, please come and listen. We're really excited about that. This series is free and open to everyone. That said, we really could use donations. So you can go to nhpeaceaction.org/donate if you are at all able to put some money in the hat, so to speak, so that we can keep these going. We think it's important and we would love to keep them going. So let's thank Kevin. And if you can do a really visible thank you, since we can't really hear each other, please join me. We're so glad to have you. This was really helpful, Kevin.
My pleasure. Thanks to all your great work and all your support for New Hampshire Peace Action.
And thanks to everyone for coming and engaging. It's an honor to be in community.